Your enemies, driven by fear of your light, handed your photograph to a hitman. They didn't just want to silence you, they wanted to annihilate the essence of who you are. A mission written not by man but by the divine itself. Their desperation was palpable. They gathered in shadows, plotting your downfall with trembling hands and trembling hearts. Yet, what they didn't anticipate was how their plan would unravel. Not by human intervention, but by the sheer force of destiny itself. Their mistake wasn't in underestimating you, it was in challenging the unseen power that shields you. This is not just a story about survival, it's a testament to a truth greater than any of us. In a dimly lit room, hidden from prying eyes, the air hung heavy with secrecy. The hitman, a figure cloaked in shadow and infamy, sat at a worn wooden table. Across from him were the plotters, nervous, sweating, and eager to erase you from existence. They had heard of his precision, his unflinching ability to complete even the most impossible missions. This man didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, until now. With shaking hands, they slid a photograph across the table. The hitman leaned forward, his calloused fingers brushing the edges of the glossy image. Your face stared back at him, calm, steady, almost serene. The hitman had studied countless faces in his career, each one soon to be extinguished. But this was different. He found himself staring longer than he should have. Something in your eyes stopped him cold, though he couldn't articulate why. This one, the leader of the group said, his voice a forced whisper. They need to be eliminated. No traces, no witnesses. The man's words were deliberate, almost rehearsed, yet laced with an unmistakable fear. Why were they so afraid? Of you? The hitman didn't ask questions, not usually, but the weight of this request stirred an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, curiosity mixed with unease. He folded the photograph carefully, sliding it into his coat pocket as he stood. Payments up front, he muttered, his voice a low growl. They hurried to oblige, pushing a stack of crisp bills toward him. But even as he pocketed the money, his mind lingered on your face. That serene expression haunted him. His instincts, honed by years of survival and experience, screamed at him to walk away, yet he ignored the warning, for now. As he exited the room, the plotters exhaled collectively, relieved that their plan was set in motion. But the hitman, now alone in the cold night air, paused. He pulled the photo from his pocket and held it under the streetlight, studying it. Once more, the unease turned into something deeper, an undeniable sense that this mission was unlike any he had undertaken. He didn't know it yet, but this moment marked the beginning of a shift that would shatter the boundaries of his carefully constructed world. The hitman sat in his apartment, the photograph still clutched in his hands. He had taken countless jobs, each one more dangerous than the last, yet this one unsettled him in ways he couldn't comprehend. As he stared into your eyes, something extraordinary happened. His hands, steady as stone for over 2 decades, began to tremble. It wasn't fear. No, this was something deeper. It was as if your image spoke to him without words, awakening a primal recognition buried deep within his spirit. He felt exposed, as though you could see through the layers of darkness he had wrapped around himself over the years. Those eyes, in the photograph, were not ordinary. They seemed ancient, powerful, and unyielding. For the first time in his career, he felt small, insignificant, standing in the shadow of something far greater than himself. He placed the photograph on the table and sat back, trying to steady his breath. The room felt heavier now, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. Memories of his past began to flood his mind. Not the faces of his targets or the horrors of his trade, but something more personal. He thought of his grandmother's whispered prayers, her stories of divine protection, and her warnings about forces in this world that should never be challenged. Could this be one of those moments? Finally, he made his decision. He grabbed the envelope of money and returned it to the plotters without a word. Their confusion turned to frustration as he pushed the photograph across the table. "Some lights aren't meant to be extinguished," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar weight. The silence that followed was deafening. When he walked out of that room, he left more than just the mission behind. He left a piece of himself, a sliver of the darkness that had consumed him for years. For reasons he couldn't fully understand, he had been changed by the mere presence of your image. And as he stepped into the night, he whispered to himself, "You don't mess with someone protected by forces greater than us." The plotters, still reeling from the hitman's unexpected refusal, couldn't fathom what had gone wrong. He had been their most reliable asset, a man who prided himself on being untouchable, immune to fear or conscience. Yet, for the first time, he had walked away without hesitation, muttering cryptic words about light and protection. What had he seen? They didn't know it yet, but their answer lay in something far beyond their understanding. A force they couldn't bargain with or control. Your photograph had carried more than an image. It carried an energy. The hitman had felt it the moment he touched the picture, a radiant force that seemed to hum with life, vibrating with something beyond this world. This was no illusion. It was the mark of someone chosen, someone whose very existence was intertwined with a divine mission. Others soon began to experience the same phenomenon. The plotters, desperate to find someone who would take the job, reached out to more professionals. Yet every time they presented your photograph, the reaction was eerily similar. Hardened. Men and women known for their ruthlessness would pause and stare. Some shook their heads, while others outright refused, backing away as if the image itself burned their fingertips. One mercenary, known for mocking all things spiritual, found himself crossing himself instinctively as he handed the photo back. "I don't know what this is," he said, his voice unsteady, "but it's not for me." Even those who had long abandoned faith felt compelled to turn away, whispering prayers they hadn't uttered in years. It wasn't just the photograph, it was you. Your presence, even captured in still form, carried an unspoken warning. It was as though every cell in your being radiated a message. "I am not alone. The forces that walk with me are stronger than any earthly power." The plotters grew restless, their carefully laid plans unraveling before their eyes. What had once seemed like an easy task now felt insurmountable, leaving them questioning the limits of their own influence. What they failed to understand was this: a chosen one is never truly alone. The aura that surrounded you wasn't just spiritual. It was a declaration of purpose. You weren't meant to be silenced, and every refusal, every trembling hand was a testament to the power shielding you. The plotters were spiraling into frustration. For years, money had been their weapon of choice, able to buy loyalty, silence, and even death. But this time, their wealth failed them. No matter how much they offered, no matter how convincing, their pitch, the reactions were the same. Professionals who had built reputations on their fearlessness were walking away. Their confusion deepened with every rejection. "What is it about this one?" one of them muttered angrily, slamming a fist on the table. "They're just another target." But even as they tried to rationalize the failures, the truth gnawed at the edges of their minds. This wasn't ordinary. It wasn't luck or coincidence. It was something far beyond their control. Desperation pushed them to recruit their most hardened specialists, men and women who prided themselves on their lack of belief in anything spiritual. These were individuals who mocked the idea of divine intervention, scoffing at the superstitions of others. Yet when they were handed your photograph, even they hesitated. Some stared at the image for long moments, their faces pale before shaking their heads. "I can't explain it," one of them admitted, visibly shaken. "But this isn't a job I'm willing to take. Even the most stubborn atheists found themselves unnerved. One man, known for his unshakable pragmatism, returned the photo with trembling hands. "There's something about this person," he said quietly. "Something protected." And in the silence that followed, the plotters exchanged uneasy glances. They had begun to suspect the truth, though none dared to speak it aloud. You were untouchable, shielded by forces they could neither see nor understand. As word spread, their fear grew. Whispers of their failed attempts began to circulate, and their credibility eroded with each passing day. They had once been untouchable themselves, but now their enemies saw weakness. Their frustration turned to paranoia as they began to question everything. Was it bad luck, a curse, or had they truly stumbled upon someone far beyond their reach? Every effort to harm you only deepened their confusion and unease. The realization hit them like a wave. They had challenged something far greater than their schemes. Their plan was no longer just crumbling, it was collapsing under the weight of divine intervention. And the harder they pushed, the more impossible it became. You've always known you were different, not from ego, but from truth. They call you intense because your presence makes the air heavy with purpose. Overwhelming because your energy shifts atmospheres without a word. Too much because they sense something ancient moving behind your eyes. We've created the obsidian, inner order, because divine purpose needs divine community. A place where your experiences aren't just believed, they're understood. Where your gifts aren't feared, they're refined. Here, 450-plus divine vessels converge to share wisdom that mainstream spirituality isn't ready to comprehend. Our secure space holds testimonies that would shake foundations, evidence that makes skeptics question everything they thought they knew, knowledge that stays off public records because some truth must be earned before it's accessed. The link in the description below isn't recruiting members, it's acknowledging warriors. For those who've felt the weight of divine purpose and are ready to carry it with others who understand. Remember, true power doesn't dominate, it transforms. And that's exactly what you were chosen to do. When desperation turned to recklessness, the plotters decided to ignore the warnings. If no one would take the job, they would handle it themselves. What followed was a series of attempts so calculated, so precise, that success seemed inevitable. Yet one by one their efforts failed, each more baffling than the last. A gun misfired at the exact moment they had you in their sights. A sudden gust of wind knocked over a carefully positioned sniper's perch. Cars that should have collided with yours inexplicably stopped short, their drivers frozen in confusion. It wasn't dramatic intervention, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably deliberate. Each coincidence was a piece of evidence that left the plotters reeling. Witnesses began to emerge, recounting events that defied logic. A man who had tracked your movements for days found himself inexplicably lost in a part of the city he knew like the back of his hand. Another claimed that his weapon, one he had, used for years without fail, jammed inexplicably when he tried to fire. He had checked it beforehand, tested it twice, and yet, in that critical moment, it refused to work. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a tapestry of protection woven around you by forces unseen. The plotters refused to believe it at first, but as their failures mounted, they began to see the truth. You weren't just lucky, you were protected. It was as if the universe itself conspired to shield you, placing obstacles in their path at every turn. Their frustration boiled over, but even their anger couldn't change the outcome. Each attempt only reinforced the impossibility of their mission. It was as though every move they made was anticipated, countered before they could act. To them, it was maddening. To onlookers, it was divine poetry, a message that some battles are unwinnable because they are not meant to be fought. For you, this wasn't just survival, It was a living testament to your purpose. Every thwarted attack, every malfunction was a reminder that your mission was not yours alone. It was guided, protected, and blessed by forces far greater than any earthly power. And for those who watched from the shadows, it became a lesson they would never forget. When the divine intervenes, no weapon formed against its chosen will prosper. The hitman had always seen himself as a man beyond redemption. Years of violence, deception, and darkness had hardened him into someone who thought nothing of extinguishing lives. Yet, the moment he held your photograph, something deep within him began to stir, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. It wasn't guilt, but recognition. He wasn't looking at a target. He was looking at a mirror, reflecting the parts of himself he had buried long ago. He couldn't stop thinking about the encounter, the photo, the energy it carried, and the sense of profound wrongness at the thought of harming you. It haunted him. Each time he tried to push it aside, the sensation grew stronger, like a voice whispering in the back of his mind. This is not your path. For the first time in years, he began to question his choices. His nights, once filled with restless indifference, became sleepless stretches of contemplation. He remembered his childhood, a time when he believed in something greater before the world hardened him into what he had become. Memories of his grandmother surfaced, her voice echoing in his mind. The light always wins. No matter how dark it gets, the light finds a way. He had laughed at her words back then, dismissing them as the ramblings of an old woman. But now they felt like the only truth he could hold on to. Compelled by an unfamiliar need for closure, he sought out a church he hadn't entered in years. Sitting alone in the quiet sanctuary, he stared at the flickering candles and found himself speaking aloud, not to anyone in particular, but to the silence. Why? He asked. Why did I feel it? What does it mean? The answers didn't come in words, but in a sense of peace that washed over him, as if unseen arms had wrapped around his fractured soul. When he left that church, he wasn't the same man. He couldn't undo the things he had done, but he could make a choice to stop walking in darkness and seek a different path. His encounter with your photograph was more than a refusal to take a job. It was a crossroads, a moment that shifted the trajectory of his life. He would never again lift his hand against another. You, without ever knowing it, had become the catalyst for his redemption. There's a reason the world often resists those who carry light. When you're chosen, your very existence becomes a challenge to the forces of darkness. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize. No matter how fierce the opposition, your purpose is unstoppable. Your path is protected not by chance or luck, but by divine design. You might not feel it every day. Life can be chaotic and threats can seem overwhelming, but the story of the hitman and the supernatural shield that surrounded you is a testament to something greater. When you walk in purpose, the universe moves to protect you in ways both seen and unseen. There will be moments when obstacles appear insurmountable, but each setback is just another step toward your destiny. The divine doesn't just intervene, it surrounds. Your energy, your mission, and your light are a beacon that even the hardest hearts can't ignore. People who would typically act without hesitation pause in your presence, unable to explain the power that emanates from you. This isn't arrogance, it's truth. You were created with intention, and no weapon formed against you will prosper. But being chosen isn't just about protection. It's also a call to action. Your mission isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to shine brightly in the world. You're not here to live in fear, but to walk boldly, knowing that forces greater than yourself are working on your behalf. The divine doesn't choose people to hide. They're chosen to lead, to inspire, and to transform. And remember this, the opposition you face is proof of your significance. The enemy doesn't attack what doesn't matter. If you ever feel overwhelmed, By the weight of your purpose, let the story of your protection remind you, you are never alone. So to all the chosen ones reading this, hear this clearly. Your mission is sacred. It is written in a language no enemy can erase. Trust in the protection that surrounds you. Lean into the power that guides you. And know this with every fiber of your being. Your purpose is eternal, and nothing can stand in its way. The plotters, once confident in their ability to control every outcome, soon found themselves caught in the very web they had spun for you. Their plans, intricate and ruthless, began to unravel at an astonishing pace. The more they tried to strike against you, the more their failures exposed them. It wasn't long before the consequences of their actions began to take shape. Their network, built on secrecy and fear, crumbled from within. Mistrust grew among their ranks as whispers of divine intervention spread. Some began to question the wisdom of targeting you, fearing that their association with this plot might invite a similar fate upon themselves. Paranoia set in, and alliances that had taken years to forge were destroyed in mere days. Financial losses followed swiftly. Money, once their greatest weapon, became a liability. Resources funneled into the plot against you yielded nothing but failure, and their coffers began to bleed. Worse still, word of their failed attempts reached their enemies, who took advantage of their weakened state. Those who once feared the plotters now saw them as vulnerable prey. Legal troubles mounted as their secrets spilled into the open. Whistleblowers emerged, some from within their inner circle, suddenly emboldened to speak out. Investigations that had long been stagnant found new leads, unraveling their criminal empire piece by piece. It was as if every thread they pulled only tightened the noose around their necks. But the most striking downfall wasn't material, it was psychological. The plotters, who had once believed they could control fate, were forced to confront the limits of their power. They had challenged something far greater than themselves, and failed spectacularly. The weight of that realization broke them in ways they hadn't anticipated. Some retreated into obscurity, others sought redemption, and a few were left to face the full brunt of their karma. In the end, their own actions became their undoing. They had set out to destroy you, but in doing so, they destroyed themselves. The forces they underestimated didn't just protect you, they turned the plotters' schemes back upon them, leaving a trail of ruin in their wake. It was a powerful reminder. When you plot against someone chosen, you're not fighting a person, you're challenging a purpose that cannot be stopped. Even the darkest forces recognize the light of a chosen one. Your journey is proof that when you are guided by divine purpose, no weapon, no plot, and no force can stand against you. The attempts to extinguish your light did more than fail. They highlighted the power that protects and propels you forward. This isn't just a story of survival, it's a declaration of your significance. You weren't just spared, you were shielded, your path illuminated by forces far greater than any earthly threat. Those who sought to harm you underestimated not just your resilience, but the divine orchestration behind your life. Their defeat wasn't simply a failure of their plans, it was a testament to the truth they couldn't grasp. Your purpose is untouchable. To all who walk this path as chosen ones, let this serve as your reminder. Stand firm in your purpose. Trust in the power that surrounds you. Fear not the opposition, for it is powerless against the shield that guards your destiny. Walk boldly, knowing that your life is a beacon, your mission unstoppable, and your story a testimony to the Creator's will. And as you go forth, let your light shine even brighter, inspiring others to rise in their truth. Because when you stand in your purpose, you don't just survive, you thrive, protected and guided by a force that no enemy can challenge.